Ach, das macht's. Ich glaube, wir können alle schon hoch. Ja. Ja, kommt halt. All right. Yeah. Thank you, Claudia, for this intro and warmest welcome to this panel on implementing the AI Act. So, as most of you may have heard by now, the AI Act has entered into force in August, and the timeline on implementation is moving fast. Particularly important, the high-risk requirements that affect actually a substantial share of large German companies and also small and medium German companies will actually kick in August 2026 for those systems listed under Annex 3 and in August 2027 for those systems listed under Annex 1, that are those systems that are already regulated under existing NLF regulation. And given these pressing timelines, it seems quite crucial to discuss how companies are actually navigating and preparing the implementation of the high-risk requirements, and also what role the harmonized European standards that actually specify these high-risk requirements play in this process. And to discuss these important matters, I'm delighted to be welcoming this panel of well-qualified experts to discuss these issues. So, like another quick round. So I want to start with welcoming our three representatives of large German companies. To my left, Christoph Peylo, the Chief Cybersecurity Officer at Bosch. Benno Blumoser, the head of the Siemens AI.Lab. Florian Jell, the Chief Data Officer at Allianz. Kirsten Rulf, Partner and Associate Director at Boston Consulting Group. And Franziska Weindauer, CEO at the TÜV AI.Lab. And yeah, starting with our three representatives of large German companies, they all will share their perspective on what are actually, how their companies go about implementing the high-risk requirements of the AI Act and what the greatest challenges are with that. And then Kirsten will also share her perspective on what she, as someone who advises companies on these topics, will actually experience as the greatest challenges and uncertainties in becoming compliant with the Act. And then Franziska will also share her perspective on the readiness of the German testing, certification, and market surveillance ecosystem. And now, without further ado, I want to get right into this discussion and start with asking you, Christoph, and you, Benno, how are your companies actually affected by the AI Act? How do you go about implementing the high-risk requirements? And what are the greatest challenges and concerns you have in doing that? May we start with you, Christoph, and then go right over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Janis. By the way, I will not respond to that as Chief Cybersecurity Officer, but I am responsible for AI governance at Bosch as well, so different perspective as well. Yeah, sure, we are. We are impacted by the AI Act because most of our interesting products are safety and security relevant. So we are one of the leading suppliers in the world for automotive, and we are in industrial technology. So those are fields with robotics, manufacturing, or autonomous driving and assistant driving, where AI plays a role, a crucial role, but which is then part of the critical AI. Unfortunately, this legislation is a bit underspecified because it's clear that that we have to do something, but so it reads a little bit fuzzy, but so the policymakers were very optimistic that the standardization process, which they started, should bring the necessary clarity for that. Interesting thought, because normally, so there are many good things which can be said about standardization, but often they do not bring this legal clarity in things so far. But let's consider it a project in agility and fast learning. So we have to adapt on that, and what we are doing is we are providing, because we are used to build critical product, providing all the documentations, what we do, and how we think that verification and validation, which is in AI in general an unsolved problem so far, but I think Franziska can point that out later. So we are preparing for that. However, since the legal basis is actually missing, we cannot predict whether this will be sufficient. We hope so, because it's to foster innovation as well, and we shouldn't be hampered in our innovation efforts. But it's a risky but interesting journey.
Thanks. We would go right over to you, Benno.
Yeah, some of the aspects I think are very similar to what you just said. I mean, Siemens, as many other big companies, is used to coping with new regulations, right? I mean, this is part of our lifeblood, and we always have to play with that trade-off between offering a highly secure and robust solution to our customers, on the other hand side, to do that in a effort-efficient way, right? So that's the game where we're used to play in. And you might now say, well, now with Trustworthy AI, the AI Act, it's just a new episode on that, right? That's on the one hand, it's true, but on the other hand, it's something new to the whole system, because the pace, the speed of the technological development, and the level of uncertainty is really unknown right before. So that's not just another regulation. So you have to say. Then what does it mean for us? Well, first of all, of course, we have to do our homework, right? And we have to analyze the AI Act. We actually have been doing so in different versions that have been published, and derive that for our internal processes, right? For our product and solution safety, security processes. I mean, the AI Act is like a horizontal regulation, so we have a lot of vertical regulations, machine directives, and so on. So we have to analyze what does it add upon, and how can we implement that into our processes. And then there are some special questions, especially when it comes to our colleagues at Siemens Healthineers, for example. They really suffer. It's quite a process burden for them because the medical device regulatory was just recently introduced, so that comes upon that. It's really a process burden for them. I mean, you might have heard the keynote from the Microsoft Germany CEO this morning, right? Our industrial co-pilot. Also here, there are some interesting question marks that are not yet solved. For example, is when we now build upon the Microsoft or the OpenAI foundation models, something on our own with a specific value add depth, from which point on are we no longer a deployer, but maybe a downstream provider of that model, right? So that these are things that are unsolved. But maybe one concern which I really have is not so much about Siemens or the other big players, right? We are all big players here. We're used to this, but maybe in this round also what's missing is somebody who does not propose of armies of process soldiers, right? But the startups or the small medium enterprises who really are hit much harder, and that's of course our ecosystem, and we have to avoid that they either go abroad or that they skip innovations which they should do. So because they don't want to go in these critical areas.
Yeah, thank you for outlining these quite important points. So turning over to you, Florian. The AI Act also classifies AI systems that are used for pricing and health and life insurance as high-risk use cases under Annex 3. And those will already be under the need to comply with the AI Act in August 2026. So same question to you. How are you at Allianz as a big insurance provider affected by the AI Act? And maybe also how do the challenges you have in becoming compliant differ or may not differ from what you have just heard from your colleagues at Bosch and Siemens?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. I think we will deal a lot with the AI Act because first of all, we have tremendous potential for AI across the entire value chain. So from sales to customer service to claims processing. So wherever you look in the insurance value chain, you can basically use AI. And then we have, of course, a portfolio of life and health insurance products, which falls under the annex that tells it's high risk. So yes, it will be impact for us. I'm not that scared that we cannot deal with it because we have always dealt with regulation. We are very used to dealing with regulation. We have a lot in place. So we heard that from SAP before. So same here. We have a code of conduct for the ethical use of AI and all that. So I think we are well prepared and we have many people. What scares me a little is, it's just another piece of regulation and another and another and another, and it piles up. And I have teams telling me that they have around 20, even 30% of their capacity, so developing teams, software product developing teams, go to tasks that come from regulation, documentation, filling out templates, checkboxes. And this really costs us productivity. So we'll be able to deal with that, but it comes at a price. And to a bit more specifically to the high risk, so I'm really curious how all this will look on the ground. So I mean, we have from GDPR, we already have the privacy impact assessment. AI Act will have the fundamental rights impact assessment. I still do not really know how much will this have in common, how much will we have to do twice. And that's really where it becomes important that on the ground for the teams, we have keep that simple. And as the minister said, the act is there, and now we have on the operational level try to make it easier for the companies, and even more for the startups and the smaller ones.
Thank you. Now to bring in the consulting perspective and maybe even broader market perspective, Kirsten, according to your experience, what do you perceive as on a daily basis as you are advising companies on the AI Act and AI governance in general? What do you perceive as the greatest challenges and uncertainties like companies face in becoming compliant with the AI Act?
So I'm going to bring in a couple of points, if I may. So first of all, just very recently, a CEO told me he's so glad that there's now the AI Act because he's actually using it as a strategic steering element to finally know what's going on in the company, to have everything unified, all the mushrooming stuff. Now he's finally getting, a clear view on all of the AI in his company, both third-party AI but also, self-developed AI. That's one view that you can have, for sure. And I appreciate that there's a lot of questions, and that was also one of the reasons for the AI Act when I was still a policymaker, I could understand it very well, is that from a strategic risk appetite point and governance point, this is certainly something that can be an organizing element. But I think the truth is also, what has been mentioned here quite a bit, is that it's one more piece of regulation, and that the people that have to actually implement that regulation often speak widely different languages. So the legal department that does the whole AI Act exegesis speaks a different language than the people that actually want to build the AI and know a different truth on the ground and speak a different language. And those two need to be combined, and that comes with a lot of friction and a lot of energy. And as already been said, it takes a lot of capacity actually away that could otherwise go into different things, especially because we also have the Data Act, we also have cybersecurity regulation, and everything kind of hitting at the same time. And for big companies, yes, you're all used to that and you have huge departments, but I still perceive it as pretty cumbersome, for sure, especially when it comes to the detailed implementation. That's not quite clear. And the other point is that I think the tension that the AI Act brings is that we are trying, at least I hope, as a country, to really embrace this technology and to really empower businesses and also make people excited about using the technology and become accelerated with it and build use cases here and have new business ideas. And so at one point, you're trying to make people excited. On the other hand, you're trying to warn them against the risks. And that is often a tension I see in companies, that bringing AI into a company and building use cases is a big change management effort. 70% depends on people, not so much on the products or on the technology. And when you hit them with a huge risk management system first, and then you say, but now get excited and experiment with it, that's often a big tension. And I find that we're just trying to roll out the technology quite broadly in our economy, and we really need that. We in Germany specifically, but also in Europe, we really need that innovation push. We cannot go on without it. And that's really difficult. And the third point, and then I'm going to hand it over to Franziska, is that most of our companies are global companies, right? So the AI Act is only one regulation that they have to deal with. There's lots of regulatory efforts going on the other side of the Atlantic. There's a lot of stuff going on in China. And when you're a global company, you have to kind of reconcile all of that. And I'm a little bit afraid that in Europe, it won't be that we only have one law that is implemented the same all across Europe, but that, again, we will see the GDPR effect that is actually 28 member states implementing on a different level, plus US, plus China, and it only hits our European companies as much as we have to. So I think the view is a little bit, okay, nobody ever wanted untrustworthy AI or AI that isn't quality checked. At least I've never met anyone. But to formalize this is bringing a burden that could potentially be really a killer for the excitement and broad rollout of the technology.
Thank you for these insights. Now to round this up, turning to you, Franziska, you at the TÜV AI.Lab actually refine existing but also newly developed certification and testing methods and processes that are actually needed for external conformity assessments. So I'm curious, like, what is the progress you have made so far in that? What are the greatest challenges in actually accomplishing that you have experienced so far? And then also your take on what is the overall readiness of the German certification, testing, and market surveillance ecosystem?
I think maybe if someone's ready, it's going to be Germany, because they're always very diligent in implementing legislation, right? I mean, they're always the first, the one in the class that says, yeah, I'm gonna do it really, really deeply, and I'm really gonna care about what the law says. No, I think, I mean, a lot of interesting points already. I think it's also a great chance for Europe to figure out what we need to do to make AI safe, right? And to have a harmonized approach on that. And I think it's actually fantastic that we know we have a couple of criteria, maybe 5 criteria, that are set in the EU AI Act, like robustness, transparency, accuracy, cybersecurity, and then data quality, bias, and non-discrimination. And I think we have these sets of maybe 5, 6, 7 criteria. We can now look at how we're implementing that. And that was the first thing that we did, of course, was looking at, we were founded in last November, looking at what the legal basis actually says, what's already in the norms and the standardization efforts, etc. And then now we're in parallel building an AI testing framework, an assessment framework, of course tied to also a risk assessment, and looking at which metrics do we actually have to test these criteria. And we kind of find that there are a lot of metrics out there, but the difficulty with AI and, for example, testing AI fairness is that you don't have 1 or 2 metrics, you're going to apply, or, a standard set of tests, and, in situation A, I'm going to deploy these tests, and in situation B, I'm going to test AI that way. But, for example, with non-discrimination, the metrics and the measurements will look differently of non-discrimination, how non-discriminative your product is. How to measure that will look differently in every use case, right? So in one use case, you have, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 fairness metrics. And in one use case, you're going to use the one fairness metric. In another use case, you're going to use a different one. And what the TÜV also struggles with is that, there's a lot of uncertainty around, and you don't have, concrete benchmarks you can aim for in a lot of cases, right? The TÜV likes to say, we have a 99.99% certainty that the system is never going to do anything wrong, right? And with AI, we won't obviously have that in a lot of cases. And I think that's the difficulty right now, that there's a lot of ambiguity. We don't have state-of-the-art testing frameworks. But I think it's also a great chance to develop that. And we're in Europe going to be first, right? We're going to know first because we're caring now. And we're caring differently than the US. They're looking at Gen AI systems or models mostly. And I think it's great that we're developing these frameworks right now. We're going to have a couple of frameworks in place in Europe in a couple of years. Everyone is going to know how to do it, and then we can deal with that, and then also startups will know. But we will need to make sure that we are not going to implement the law differently 27 times, right? Or in Germany, we see already with the market surveillance that there are going to be probably hundreds of actors on communal level and elsewhere that are going to do the market surveillance. And we kind of need to, get away from thinking in silos, also in market surveillance, etc. But we need to, have a system in place where you have unified testing facilities, for example, which all market surveillance authorities can call and say, can you help me in doing this? Or sandboxes that smaller companies can call and say, how do we do this? Can you help us do it? and get it done and get quality checked.
Thanks. Yeah, interesting. I think there were already quite a lot of very important points raised. I actually now want to dive a little bit deeper in particularly the role of the harmonized European standards. Are they such a hot topic of discussion? And like actually go back to you, Kirsten, and ask you, like what in your view, how should companies actually approach setting up their AI Act compliance and AI governance, and what role do the harmonized European standards play in this process?
So first, I think there's a couple of steps to make the AI Act really pragmatic. And I think that's the first approach that you need to have to the AI Act, that you need to be very pragmatic about this. You will not be able to, I mean, this is a law that wasn't just written for companies, it was also written for state governments, it was written for a lot of different stakeholders, and it really shows in the text. And the question I get a lot is, do we have to do all of this, and what does it really apply to us? So you need to dissect and see what does apply to you really, and also where can you maybe subsume risks that are mentioned in the AI Act into already existing risk taxonomies. And what I see across certain industries is that there is already a pretty good risk management system. Banking, for instance, insurance also has good risk taxonomies that go down very deeply into the model risk management fraction. And in other industries, we see very much the same. So the risk taxonomy that you need to build, you really need to decide what is new with AI, what is enhanced with AI, and where do we have pretty good controls already at hand. And with that comes a really good governance that you need in your company that is smoothly green-lighting what can go through without further scrutiny. Sometimes you're in bad luck and you have the high-risk systems basically everywhere in almost every product. But then also there needs to be very clear governance. Okay, who is looking at what? The division of labor needs to be clear. The risk ownership needs to be with who had the risk ownership for that risk also before. And no new bureaucracy tower next to all the different assessments that you already have to go through. If you start that AI bureaucracy tower, I always see companies failing. They just get lost in the text, and you will not be able to reconcile it with existing regulation. And then once you've built the governance, once you've actually also sorted out the scope, if what is actually falling under the AI Act and how you really make the definition of the AI Act also practical for your own business, that is, I find, a really big step for most companies to really figure out that kind of legalese definition of AI in the AI Act. How do we make it practical, and how do we talk to our first line, our sort of technical people about this, and then have figured out the risk taxonomy. Then from there it gets a lot easier, really. Then you can figure out how to really smoothly implement it in the company, and then the other step is, of course, to roll it out globally and really be practical about the global standard. Because, as I said, the EU AI is not the only standard. And if you're a global company, then you really need to figure out, okay, where do I need a global standard for my AI safety, also towards the customer? And where do I need maybe local top-ups? And where can I be a bit more easy? And I think what we will also see is that companies will then diversify, where they build use cases, where they send talent, where they see the biggest value. And I'm actually excited, but also a bit anxious about seeing that development because we might actually see some surprises there. But I do think if you approach the AI Act as this kind of sometimes, also through the negotiations that we had in Brussels, sometimes a bit overwhelming document, you won't reach the end. And I'm excited about the processes that we'll also have with the big model providers and what their role in documentation, etc., will be. It's starting in Brussels Monday, right? I think a lot of industry is involved also there. I hope at least, and I hope that we will also have a fair discussion there, because what I sometimes perceive in the discussions, especially in Germany, is that there's the roles are already assigned before the discussion has already started, and I see that very different when I look across Europe. Like in Sweden, the discussion is very different. It's close discussion between industry and government, very close. In Britain, there's a big discussion. I think we need to come also to a discussion where industry also gets to say their rightful points, which in the end inform the political discussion also.
Yeah, thank you for this dissection and of this and structuring, actually, how you can approach that, at least on a high level. And now turning back to you, Franziska, actually, like the standards are also, of course, majorly on your horizon as for the TÜV AI.Lab. And I'm curious, how can you actually contribute to the development of the standards, and also what actually makes a good standard? Like, how do you design standards that are well testable and certifiable in the end?
I mean, what we first of all, it's good that we have, or we're going to have, harmonized standards, because that's different from the GDPR, and I think also, you know, the European Commission and the people drafting the text already learned from the mistakes we've made previously, so that's actually a good thing. And we're involved in JTC 21 in the standardization committee and in subcommittees as well. And what we see is that it's super difficult to get the different frameworks that people have that come to the table there, to get them, you know, to put them over one another and to harmonize them to a point that you can be really precise. That would be what would be super beneficial for example, TÜV, you know, certification players, but also companies to know exactly what you have to do, right? That would be great. But I think the scope of the regulation and the point we're at in technological development, etc., we're way too early to be super specific. So I think it would be fantastic to see really concrete standards, but I think what we're going to get is probably more looser kind of framework and sort of a direction. But it's impossible for the people doing the work, and I think you're majorly involved. It's super time consuming, and it's really difficult. And a lot of the things we don't know yet. We don't really know how to test for robustness. You know, we don't really know how to test for accuracy, and there are very few experts, and these experts come from different fields. You know, some have safety backgrounds, some have security backgrounds, some come from the sectoral fields, you know, from the medical field or from automotive, etc. And then you have the classical IT guys, you know, the AI people, and they all do different threat modeling, different risk assessments, and to get these approaches, I mean, and they're really, like, they're not approaches, they're ideologies almost, right? So these people really believe in their frameworks, and it's really difficult at the table to get these frameworks, you know, to put them together and to build something meaningful. And that's what we see in regulation as well. If we look at the AI Act, you know, thousands of people have contributed in somewhere, and everyone has placed a word on the, we always said the Christmas tree, you know, everyone wants to put up some decoration, and then in the end you have this massive tree, which is really colorful and not really coherent, and it looks kind of ugly. And I think that's what we've seen with the AI Act as well. You know, it's not written by one person and super, you know, streamlined, but it's a bit messy, and we have to make pragmatic sense of that mess, I guess.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, speaking of this complicated and challenging ongoing process of standardization, I actually want to come back to the simpler question: what do we actually do in the meantime while these standards are still in the making, right? JTC 21 anticipates that the standards will not be finalized and published before the end of 2025, the earliest. We hear it might be even more delayed. And then the question, of course, arises, like, with this timeline on implementation moving, how do you actually proceed on setting up your product development processes, your compliance processes, and those areas affected by the AI Act, while the standards are still in the making and you don't have these clear guidance on what you in the end need for conformity or security of conformity. So yeah, I want to turn back to you three as my companies here on the panel. So yeah, and maybe here starting with you, Florian, as you probably affected already by 2026.
What do we do now? So, well, it's fairly easy. Step one is get transparency on the portfolio. I really liked what Kirsten just said. AI use cases are coming all over the company, and once you start collecting them all and getting transparency, it's really interesting what you find. Also, I mean, the AI Act is not only on generative AI. Everyone is talking about generative AI, but there is many AI use cases that also fall under the definition. So step one, transparency, and then here's the second one. I liked what you just said. Don't build up a AI Act silo next to the DORA silo, next to the FIGHT silo, next to the rest of all the compliance processes, because then it will be complicated. So we have to try to set up a very lean process that serves for business purposes, same as for compliance processes, and then, well, yeah, wait for what comes from when we have all the details and on all the documents that we have to hand in to the regulator.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, with an eye on time, yeah, do you want to add to this, Benno? Yeah, what is your view on this?
Yeah, fully support what you just said, Florian. In addition, I mean, of course, it will be a tough time until we finally have that harmonized standards. Some have to enter some kind of agility, like flexibility phase. But I mean, let's be clear here. Many things what we do also in terms of standardization or creating standards is not just because there is an AI Act, right? We have been, for example, in research projects together with other companies when it comes to autonomous trains. And we don't want these autonomous trains to be safe just because of the AI Act, but because we want the trains to be safe, right? That's the intrinsic motivation behind it. And of course, there are activities going on there, right? And for example, in that specific case, we are in that research consortium with Fraunhofer and other companies, and deduct from, okay, what's all the regulation that apply for a human conductor, right? What is required from that person, and how can we translate it into what does it mean for an AI system, and how can you actually measure safety, right? What does it mean in terms of what reaction time is needed, what's in the scope of attention of that human conductor, and all this nitty-gritty detail work has to be done and helps us being better prepared for any standard that will come, because they hopefully they come to similar conclusions. But also we help them with that groundwork also to speed up with the standardization process. So that's the hope behind it.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd love to hear your
So
thoughts.
I think I liked everything what everybody said, but I would like to highlight two elements. So what Franziska said about the standards, at the end of the day, the standards will not provide more clarity than we have today. And that's a bit disappointing, because this is not what the Commission intended. But intention and reality, we all know that. And I would like to go back as well to an element of Benno. He said, industry has an intrinsic motivation to build safe and secure products because we want people to buy them and to use them, of course. So it's really intrinsic. There is this Bosch paradigm, for instance, invented for life. So technology should provide value for life. And this is something where we do not intend that AI could compromise this paradigm. So our motivation is really key here. And so we are optimistic. In 2 years' time, we have not more on the regulatory side of things, more clarity. So then the regulators have to take a pragmatic decision, or killing the industrial base here eventually. And I hope they go for the pragmatic decision, because it says now in the regulation, then if the standards are not ready, then so then the third-party verification bodies have a crucial role in assessing whether that does make sense. And based on the experience with companies who already are in the process of building difficult and critical products and how they do it with all the process documentation and so on, I'm optimistic that we can then keep the risks of AI in check, because it's really the first time that we regulate a technology, not processes or products or so, but technology. So this is something new for all of us. But I think along the lines, the established lines of how we produce goods, how we do inventions, how we deal as regulators and third-party regulatory bodies and assessors managing risks. Basically, this has worked so far, and it could work in future as well if we decide to be pragmatic.
Great. I think that we're already quite good final words, because unfortunately we already reached the end of this discussion quite soonish, as I think. But yeah, thank you all for shedding some light on these quite complex issues. And I can only say that we here at Bitkom will continue to closely address all of these aspects of implementation of the AI Act. Thank you all. And with that, I can give back to you, Claudia, and thank you all.
Thanks.
Yes, also from my side to all of our panelists, thank you so much for being here and discussing about implementation of the AI Act. And of course, Janis, thank you so much for leading the panel. That was fun. This is your applause. Thank you very much.